What is an Ishaya monk?
I'll break it down for you. Ishaya is two words in Sanskrit. Isha, Isha, and Ya, Ya, Ishaya. And Isha means for highest consciousness, for or in support of. And Ya means in support of that. So you've got your highest consciousness and then in support of that. And also Ya can mean heart opening into, which I love, because it's like coming back to yourself, coming back to that heart-centered self, away from that linear logical. It serves a purpose. We need both of the ways the brain functions. We've got the linear logical and then we've got the spatial with the intuition and the creativity. A Shire monk is somebody who wants to be the best version of themselves, the highest version of themselves, the purest version of themselves, which is like crazy that we're not all just being ourselves in a way, isn't it, really? To be yourself is just such a natural thing. There's so much in the world that's normal, the way we function, the way we are, the way we interact with others. When people say, oh, that's the way we've always done it, that drives me crazy. It's hurting people. Should we change it now? So for Ishaya, it's really all about kindness, authenticity, and really focusing on what you want, on what you love, and that connection with people, letting people be themselves, accept themselves exactly as they are, so they can discover that fullest version in themselves. It's living from the inside out. I work on my own experience and then I share that with others and encourage and show them how they can do that for themselves. So it's a community of really kind souls who have the values, like we have vows, for example, but they're my core values of honesty and a few others. So non-violence and things like that. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really. And it's not so much about that outer experience, being honest, not telling lies, for example, or non-violence, not hitting or hurting people. So non-violence, for example, for me, the most important part is the inner experience, that I'm not self-violent, that I put down the whip, I stop beating myself up and live fully who I am unapologetically. And I think the more we do that, then the more others follow the example. So you really walk your talk rather than just preaching information. So it's very much for us, the foundation of anything we teach is within ourselves, so that we're having the experience, it's rock solid. So when we're sharing it, it's not just a concept, it's a direct living experience right here, right now.
Beautiful. And I know a little bit about the story of what set your feet upon the path to becoming an Ishaya monk. We did an episode, I believe, on that. You spoke about your book, Peace or Pain, and now you're writing another book.
Yeah, so the Peace or Pain book led into another book called Surrender is Good for the Soul, because when I say pain, I'm really referring to the secondary reactive pain. Like you can cut yourself, it's going to hurt. There's certain things in life that hurt. It's a signal to point out you need to stop what you're doing in a way. But that secondary reactive pain of suffering, where we're lamenting about it now, there's dialogue about it. Oh, what did you do that for? Or why is this happening to me? And when will this end? And that whole dialogue around it. And we resist, basically, that secondary experience. Any suffering happens because of resistance. It's not what's happening to us, it's our resistance to it now, because there's friction and pressure. And there's a whole story around what's happening, which governs our experience. So it's not a pure experience, it's one that is informed by the mind. So for me, surrender is obviously the antidote to resistance, and it's seeing across every part of your life how that impacts our lives. And the more we can understand about it and see, actually, yes, that's resistance. And why do we do that? Where's it coming from? And how do we counteract that? How do we come back to living in a state of surrender, which is not to any other thing, surrender to the greatest part within us, so that we can be the fullest version of ourselves. And it's such a gentle journey. And the third book that I just recently published is a workbook and journal to go with the first book. So it's much more interactive with a card deck in the back pages of the book, and sections you can fill in with tips and like a whole mind body catalogue of things. So it's quite useful for myself to refer to, actually. When there's something you want to look up, all the stuff I've come across over the years, I just put it all in there. And with quotes as well, I love quotes, because I think quotes are like really punchy, aren't they, to get a point across very succinctly, and often very inspiring and thought-provoking. And I love that, because I think peace or pain becomes a choice when we investigate, when we stop looking at how things are right now and just putting up with it. This is our lot in life, but could it be different? how do we make it different? So we start to get curious and investigative, but in an experiential way rather than the mind trying to figure stuff out. What's actually true for us right now? Yes, some stuff can be true because our mind's telling us and we're having the experience, but is that the final answer? Is there a greater experience available to us? Let's explore what is possible. I see people out there having an amazing experience. That's why I love having a spiritual teacher, because I see his experience, and every single time I see him, I'm like, I want that. And my experience just blossoms and grows day after day, week after week. You know, a year ago, it was a very pale experience compared to how full and vibrant it is now. I know in another year's time, the experience I'm having now is going to almost feel ridiculous, because you just keep growing in consciousness and it just becomes so much more full. Like it never stops being more. And that makes life very exciting. So we're going towards something now rather than away from something. That's where so much suffering comes from, because we're looking at what's wrong in the world and we've got to put that's wrong, don't like that. And what you focus on grows. So it's a weird, in a way, path to take to view the world with what's wrong all the time, because then you're going to get that feeling of wrongness, and there's always going to be something else to fix. My first book was really all about, the unbroken you. As pure awareness, for example, we might notice anxiety, but that which is aware is not anxious. It's coming back to the awareness, and then you stop. Like for me, the anxiety, majority of my life now, is just not there. And I used to live in a permanent state of anxiety. And I love that. I love that when my teacher says that. What is aware of the anxiety is not anxious. What is aware of the anger is not angry. It's so liberating that you can actually come back to that as a direct living experience, so that you can have that experience, not just someone tells you it's true and you can believe it or not believe it. If it's true, like I like the sound of that, then you go for it. If you do that, then the teacher appears, the path appears, whatever is the best way for you appears, and then you just go for it.
I love the picture of that horse you have in the background.
It
Is that a photograph?
is a photograph. It's not one of mine. It's just one I came across before I learned the ascension techniques. And the previous step that got me to ascension and the Ishayas was shamanism. The wild white horse was my power animal, and power animals are amazing. Actually, my only really deep meditative experience before I learned ascension, and I was connecting in, I was saying a repetitive phrase of like, I'm connected to my higher self or something along those lines. I forget now. And I went into a really deep state of relaxation, and this wild white horse presented several times, and I felt the energy of it in me, and it represents power and freedom. I've always loved horses anyway, but for me, yeah, that's just that representation. All power animals and all the work with that is about the qualities that we want to imbue in our own lives. So yeah, the wild white horse is power and freedom, and my highest desire is freedom. So it aligns with my ascension life as well.
Seen a huge contrast in you since we last met. You have more of an inner potency that seems to be climbing in its potency. That is now much more transmissive. And that's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, thank you. It's even more beautiful to live it. And doing video shorts myself on my own YouTube channel. When I first started doing them, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, the very first video short. I think I'd done 4 until very recently. So I started at 5 onwards. And honestly, the difference just in my face, like I could see much more tension on my face 3 or 4 years ago. So my face has softened and relaxed. And there's a kind of a warmth there and an openness there just by the looking at it. I can see the way I speak, and it's highlighted a few ways. There's one video where I said a lot, and it's really great because then it highlighted it. It brought it to my conscious awareness. Because I think when we do repetitive phrases like that, it can be a sign that there's something we're stuck in a pattern. So there's nothing wrong with it. But I think the more you see it, then the dialogue opens up. So you stop saying that. And I do that because I'm talking into a camera on my own. Whereas talking to you now, it's much more enjoyable because I'm interacting with you, and there's more of a reason because we're having a communication as opposed to talking into a camera on your own. It took a lot to get used to doing that. I am just so grateful, Peter. You're seeing that in me, and it's lovely. Some people see it in me and some people don't. I think people see it. You've got a very clear experience yourself, and I think that enables you to see it. You've got the eyes to see, but to live it and to know that there's more, like this isn't it.
Absolutely. And it's liberating the genius in you. And I don't mean genius in the context that we use genius. I think everybody has genius in them. I really do see that in you. I wasn't doing YouTube podcasts before. I was hiding my light under a bushel, but now I'm doing video. I actually love it and I love the interaction. But one of the things I did notice in the audio when I came to editing, the amount of times I use filler words, and it's a good thing because I've learned to pick up on that pattern and say, oh, it's a filler word because you're trying to get to a next point rather than stopping, pause, and let it come through without the filler word that people use as a bridging. But it's unnecessary. It makes the sentence or what you're trying to say so much more powerful when you remove all of those. It's like a quote where you have a quote that is so pure and simple, but it's punchy and potent. It impacts you in a very different way. You talked about surrender. What inspired your journey towards awareness of surrender?
For me, surrender has changed. My understanding of surrender massively changed. It used to be that waving the white flag, giving up. For me, it was like, I'm not surrendering. Like, I am going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to let anyone tell me what to do. I'm not going to hand over to anybody else. So for me, using the ascension techniques really opened me up to myself. It released so much stress so that I could allow that purity through. And so my understanding of words purified. And so surrender for me, it's surrendering the small self, the ego self, to the big self, coming away from the thinking patterns and coming back into pure awareness. That's the aliveness and the vibrancy in people's eyes that we see. And being willing, like talking about using the filler words and everything, it's just we're afraid of silence. Yet for me, sometimes silence can speak more than 1,000 words, and to actually be willing to just stop, pause, and give some space. And then the flow of words flows through without the need for editing or checking yourself. Am I saying the right thing? And just letting that beautiful flow come out, however it comes out, and not second guessing yourself. So surrender for me has opened up into a deeper understanding and presence, freedom. It's a surrendered state of being, like you're completely surrendered all of the time, which opens up the space for creativity, for ingenuity, and the capacity for magic to flow through. Actually, life can then be really magical and a fresh and alive. There's no moment that's ever the same. It's always this eternal now, but then it opens up and blossoms and ebbs and flows and changes, and it's beautiful. And if we're fully surrendered to the flow, we can harness the flow, we can harness the magic, we can really capitalize on every single opportunity that comes to us and every skill and talent within us. And sometimes we develop new ones simply by letting that magic and that natural flow of life force that wants to come through us to just flow through us and enliven us and bring forth some amazing, beautiful creations.
You've gone on this journey towards a greater awareness that's come into your realization. That's a wonderful thing. In your email, there's a term you used. I think it was meditation rebellion. And
as a means to rebel.
as a means to rebel. That's it. How do you see the act of meditation as a means to rebel? What potential impact do you feel that widespread adoption of this practice would have on one's own consciousness?
It's really funny. I was just doing a little guided. I used to do these 20-minute guided lunchtime sessions, and we're just having a little chat beforehand to the people. And that just came out of me. Meditation for me is a means to rebel. And one of the people just, I love that. I think a lot of the Ishayas in the world, we're rebels. Like we don't want to conform to the broken system that is causing a lot of harm. Meditation gives you the freedom to be yourself, to create the world anew. Meditation as a means to rebel means that we can actually stand up, speak up for what's right, come into a world that's just full of kindness, where we all respect each other and interact with each other, and that diversity is celebrated, where there isn't any prejudice with racism and sexism and all of those ism words, so that we're not putting anybody down. We're celebrating everybody's uniqueness, because I think the world will function beautifully with everybody just being themselves. I think that creativity just flows and everybody's talents are harnessed. There'll just be a synchronicity where everybody just works together. sometimes we just almost sit on transmit. Like we're too busy trying to put our point forward. So probably you're not so much and I'm not, but there are people who are just set on transmit and it's just like their way, no way, or the highway, and they're dictators in a way. There's no listening in that. There's no receptivity. And it's the divine feminine quality as opposed to the masculine. The example that I tend to give with the masculine and feminine is with a boat. If you've got a boat, the engine is the masculine energy. But if you haven't got the rudder, the feminine energy, you might power off in the wrong direction. So you need to hang on, actually, with some receptivity, some creativity. What's the best way for us right now? What serves us best right now? What works best right now? Line that up in the right direction, then power forward. So the masculine and the feminine qualities within us, whether you're male or it's not about being a man or a woman or whatever sex you believe yourself to be. For me, it's about harnessing that feminine energy so that we can really use the masculine, the power, the drive that you need. You can't just have the feminine energy on its own with creativity. You then need the driving force to implement that, to actually enliven that and engage with the world and do what produces the results that we're excited to see and passionate to see.
It's interesting where I look through the lens of culture and the whole masculine feminine is seen as opposites, whereas to my mind they're an adjacency because the boat without the rudder or without the engine doesn't work. And it's interesting you say that people are on transmit. I call it mentally cueing, where you're speaking to somebody and they're not really listening to you, they're just mentally cueing or lining up to say their bit. And when you look at the word listen, it's silent by anagram or lets in. So there's a micro-coded compact essence within language. When we look at language and we look at what was called Ars Magna or great arts, and when we look at language, we look at the words that we use, they have power to them. There's a magic to them. I was listening to Dr. Martin Luther King's very famous speech, I Have a Dream. And he talks about, and you obviously know this, but he talks about, I don't want to be defined. I don't want my children to be defined by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That's so powerful and visionary because that's relevant and salient in our times today.
If you get a gift and it's wrapped up, you're more excited about the contents than the wrapping paper. The wrapping paper can be beautiful. So the color of our skin, it's just the wrapping paper. And actually, it's really the depth of the contents within that is the true gift. And I think some people miss that. And again, it's just like at some point in history, somebody decided that a different colored skin, it was just difference. I think sometimes we can be afraid of things that are different from us. And that's where we miss out on the diversity and we miss out on the opportunities, whether it's the people we interact with because they've got a different color skin or they come from a different culture or they speak a different language or whatever that difference is, then we're going to miss out on probably maybe the best friend or the best opportunity to collaborate in some way. And yeah, for me, I've never understood any of these prejudices. It's never, ever resonated or made any sense to me whatsoever, or even like any type of hierarchy. I think for me, there's always been a really deep sense of equality of everybody. We're all human beings. And to actually see everybody, whatever the outside packaging is, that there's beauty within us all. And yeah, I just always remember being very puzzled in the school ground and with people saying certain comments about certain people. And it's just like they were talking in an alien language, really, because I just don't get it. I came away from this actually and became very shy and introverted. But naturally, as a very young child, I wanted to know everybody. I wanted to know, who are you? What's your story? And wanted to connect with people. Then I doubled back on myself because I got shot down so many times and told I was wrong and ridiculed and laughed at and bullied in school. So I withdrew it in myself. I recognize now that the natural tendency is I love connecting with people. I love finding out what are their wishes, what are their desires, what are their skills and their talents, and collaboration. I see some of the younger musicians, Youngblood's one of my favorite ones. They're not in competition with each other anymore. They want to work with each other. They want to enjoy and celebrate their passions together. And I love that. It's a much more inclusive world and it's a much more unified world with the younger generation. They want to celebrate it and be themselves. And they're really struggling with anxiety because It's like each generation goes down, it's like that anxiety gets more and more intense. So when you sweep stuff under the carpet, always used to be a phrase when I was growing up, you don't want to deal with it, you just sweep it under the carpet, and like, this rug has got really lumpy now, we can't function, we can't operate in the world. And that's what's happening at the moment with all the chaos in the world. Like, we've lifted the carpet and there's a whole ton of mess underneath it, and we're dealing with it and we're letting it out. But that's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Because now we can sweep it away. Now we can address it. We can look at all the gold that's hidden under that rug that we made wrong in some way.
I've experienced the same thing. I've never understood why people make these differences. When I was a young man, I wanted to travel, and I did travel. And I remember spending time with the Bedouins in southern Morocco, a place called Sidi Musa Aglu. And I remember staying with a family there. One of the things with the Bedouins was they were nomadic. What I found interesting was the impressions they took in were different every time they traveled. They weren't subject to the same impressions, the same views, the same territory necessarily. So their impressions changed. But one of the things I learned is when I wanted to take a photograph, they were, no, it's like you're stealing our soul. And I respected that. I understood that was right for them. That was their belief system. I never knew the simple act of taking a photograph. What harm is that going to do? But for them, it was all about remaining intact and sovereign, not giving part of themselves away. I look at the old film that you used to put in your camera. You take a picture, you capture an image, and it gets printed on the film, but you can't take another picture on that film. It prints your circuitries, the impressions that you take on board. That's why many people find it challenging, because they're using the same film and they can't print anything else on that negative. So the people wanted a clean film. They didn't want anything printed on it because they had their own printed circuitries, and that worked for them and worked for their culture. I find it very interesting that whilst I may think that's a very rigid thinking pattern and that may hinder an awakening process, it doesn't at all. It's part of their hierarchy of values. And one of the things that I'm curious about, something that you wrote to me in an email, was a great term, which I'd love you to elaborate on, is ruthless compassion.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I looked up ruthless recently, and one of the descriptions about it was like the opposite of compassion. You're not being compassionate at all. And so that term is basically, as an Ishaya monk, we have 3 paths. As you can see, I'm in the black path. I used to be in the white one. The white path is purity and joy. And there's a red path too, which is unconditional love. And then the black path is ruthless compassion. Compassion is a combination of love and wisdom. But the ruthless part is like the one-pointed part, that you will do whatever it takes for the highest good. It's about, again, heading in that right direction and not wavering from that path. So you are very one-pointed. It's actually the most loving thing you can do, but sometimes it can come across for some people as harsh, because they want something different than what you're saying. Particularly if they're identified with an ego thought, and that's very true and real for them. If you're presenting something different, and for me, I don't believe in unsolicited advice. Like I'll give it if asked, but I won't if not. That's been a hard lesson to learn, because I think I used to want to help people. You would say and you would jump in there, and now I've learned to just rest back in myself. So if somebody asks me, then I'll deliver it exactly, very bluntly now, actually, as I see it. But it's from such a loving place. So for me, I've always experienced all the Black Ishayas, particularly before I became one, as very gentle and loving. For somebody to have my back and be willing to point out where I'm getting lost in the ego and to point it out to me, I'm immensely grateful for that. For somebody to actually love me so much, want the best for me so much, that they'll say exactly what they can see is the best for me. And any of the Black Ishayas that I've come across, they've always had so much wisdom in a very kind way. And again, like, not unsolicited advice. If asked, then yes. And also, for me, not needing for anyone to get it. So if they don't get it, then great, no problem. But ruthlessness is very direct, very one-pointed. so that we go for what we want. Because if we get distracted along the way, we might come away from what our heart's desire is. Sometimes the heart is the best compass, and the mind can have an opinion, and we have these desires sometimes from the mind, and when they're fulfilled, it falls flat. Because you're like, oh, that's not really quite what I was expecting, because the mind could be very limited. So it can have this linear logical thing. If we do this and this and this, then this is going to happen. And then when it doesn't, you're like, huh? So it's important really to have that ruthlessness. But it needs to be from a very pure space. Although we have our different paths, there's obviously the essence of me is unconditional love and purity and joy as well. But for me, right now in the world, ruthless compassion is the most important focus that serves me, my own growth, and also everyone that I come across. It's a very gentle thing, even though ruthless can sometimes be perceived as harsh. Like a loving parent who'll just do the best for their child. No matter what, they'll be there for them, no matter what, 24/7. That's what ruthless compassion is for me.
It aligns so well with Carl Jung's ideas about the integration of opposites and the journey towards individuation, because ruthless compassion, as you've alluded to, it's a powerful approach that combines what may appear on the surface as contradictory elements. Because when I first saw that, I thought, oh, hang on a minute. But then I can see there's the fierce determination to confront truth, ruthlessness, but with a deep empathy and care for the individual, compassion. It's loving someone enough to tell them the hard truths they need to hear, even if it causes temporary discomfort. Ruthless compassion is like the integration between the shadow or our darker aspects of ourselves and the persona, which is the socially acceptable face. So it's about acknowledging that true growth really requires us to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. It's holding that tension of opposites. So by embracing both ruthlessness and compassion, it creates a dynamic tension that can lead to a profound and potent personal growth. Because it's not about being nice or agreeable all the time. It's about being authentically present and committed to the other person's growth, even when it's challenging, as you're talking about the child and the parent. It's allowed me to confront my own unconscious material. The things that we need to hear most are the very things we're usually avoiding or repressing. So a ruthlessly compassionate approach, I see, helps bring these shadow elements into consciousness where they can be integrated and transformed. And that might involve challenging someone's or one's own self-limiting beliefs or non-constructive behaviors. It may encourage someone to face their own fears rather than avoid them. It may point out inconsistencies between someone's stated values and their actions, or push someone to take responsibility for their choices and for their life. So I see that it comes from a place of deep care and commitment to one's own well-being and growth, but also to another's, because it's not about judgment or punishment. It's not a punitive thing, but it's about helping oneself and anyone you may come into contact with to align more closely with their authentic self and reach or unveil more of their potential, liberate their genius. I think of the archetype of the wise elder or the loving warrior, where there's a combination of strength and nurturing, challenge and support. So I see it as a really powerful tool for growth and healing, but I think it's one that requires great skill and self awareness to wield it effectively. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. And I was talking about self-violence before. Sometimes people ask to wear black and to become a black Ishaya. And I had a sense that I was going to be, but I don't think I could come away from being a white Ishaya to a black Ishaya until all of that self-violence within me had gone, because it's the destructive force. The white path is the creative force, the black path is the destructive force, and the red path is the maintaining force. that destructive force. You can turn in on yourself. And sometimes people have worn black and had to go back to white because they weren't quite ready, or something came up in their life for a time. So they wore white for a while again and then came back again. And it's really important that you've come away from any of those self-violent traits that we sometimes have for ourselves. Even people who project that out into the world, any of that anger and aggression out into the world, there's often an inner self-violence that's sitting on. It's so important to be gentle with ourselves and loving with ourselves. Again, compassion is a combination of love and wisdom. It's not just ruthless, it's ruthless compassion. So it's a bit like the extraordinary, really. It's like capitalizing on the compassionate side. Compassion sometimes looks like just being with somebody and saying nothing, just supporting them, listening to them. Other times it might be saying something or doing something, but it's always coming from a heart-centered space of total acceptance of that person exactly as they are right now, and maybe suggesting something that will bring them what they truly want. Most people can see that. Once I'm asked of something, I've never had anyone have a bad reaction to it, because I think most people say that there's a gentle energy about me and a gentle quality about me, and hopefully that's true, which is actually really counter to what I believed or perceived myself as. There was so much anger in me and so much self-violence that I thought I was a really hard person, a really dark person. And actually, there's so much lightness and gentleness. And I needed other people to tell me that so I could actually see it for myself, because I had such a poor opinion of myself. It's been really liberating to have other people see me, say how they see me. It's like being given the name Mira, my Ishaya name. And it's like a gift of yourself in a way. It's like the meaning of it is the essence of who and what I am. And by being given that name, I know when I first heard it, it's just like I felt like I was home. Oh, I could just rest and be myself now. So yeah, that was a really beautiful gift.
It's more about the essence of you that you amplify as distinct from the persona. My father would say to me in Greek, I call you Petros because Petros in Greek is a rock, and you are like a rock. He would give me that name. And then Michael, because he was called Michael, he touched on the essence of me because I can be a rock. I'm steadfast. I stay on the tracks with things, but there's also a little bit of the personality that goes in there. When you have a gift like Mira as a name, that is part of the agency of amplification of the essence that you bring to bear that accompanies that name.
It was really more of a recognition of who and what I am, that he saw it before I could see it. So it's not so much that he chose the name for me, he recognized the qualities of
Yeah.
who I am, and then the name just, yeah.
It's like Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull wasn't called Sitting Bull because they thought it was a cool name. They called him Sitting Bull because he amplified defiance, stubbornness. They recognized that in him. That's the essence of the man. So what he built into that essence was amplified defiance. It's what I would call part of your second self, because your first self is like, for me, is this stuff. When people say, oh, myself, well, which self are you talking about? Are you talking about the self of you that's free? Are you talking about the self of you that is aspirational? Which self are you talking about? When you talk about the essence of you, that has a quality to it, unique and precious, because you can start to build the ingredients that you need to fulfill that container that is Mira, that is Sitting Bull. If I had kids, it's, oh, my great aunt was called Helena. Oh, if I have a girl, I'll call her Helena. But I'm not recognizing as that child emerges, what essence is that child amplifying? That's where insight comes in. That's where perception comes in, not maintaining the status quo. Tell me about happiness. How do you define happiness in the context of consciousness and awakening? And how does this definition in your lens of perception differ from the common cultural understandings?
A lot of people look at the world and they need something to be happy, like another person or a new car or a new smartphone or something. It's like we put our happiness out in the world, and we're missing a trick there, because like happiness is an inside job. And we've heard that phrase. It's not even a fleeting feeling, like we get a happy feeling that flows through us. For me, happiness is the state of being, and it's a very natural state of being. Like nothing needs to be added or taken away for us to be happy. and we strip away all of our belief systems, all of our past conclusions and beliefs, and we come fully into this moment, there's just happiness and absolute pure joy, actually. It's so simple to be able to experience that. And I can see somebody in extreme pain, and as I'm talking to them, there'll be fleeting moments where they just forget to be tortured and in pain, and joy just bubbles up. Like, it's just so natural. And yeah, people often tell me that when they're talking to me. Oh my gosh, you just make me feel calm. You just make me feel peaceful. And that sense of happiness then arises from that, because for me, it's so natural. It's inside us. It's like the building blocks of who and what we are. We're not just a body. There's this pure awareness. Now the body exists within the pure awareness, not the other way around. The pure awareness isn't housed in this. It's unlimited. It's vast, and there's no beginning or end to it. And that comes back to what ascension is really all about, which is the teaching of the one, and to come back to that sense of oneness. And I'd utterly forgotten about that. And yet there were so many times in my life, it almost became this thing of enlightenment. It's something you've got to do, something you've got to become in a way. And it's just recognizing you're already there. And all of those times as a child where I'd just be lying on my garden lawn, looking up at the clouds in the sky. And I remember this sense of oneness. I didn't have the word oneness for it, but I know that everything felt in place. Everything felt perfect. Just like that moment, nothing needed to change about it. And that's the invitation for me, is you can live your entire life from a sense of oneness, from direct living experience of it. And then it's just happiness, an innate happiness.
What societal changes do you believe or do you see that are necessary to shift happiness from being viewed as a luxury to being recognized as a fundamental human priority?
Like, consciousness is evolving, we're expanding, and we're becoming more conscious as a race. We're starting to recognize what is harmful and starting to address it, sometimes clumsily, but at least we're trying. So I think we're heading that way anyway. I think it's inevitable because it's who and what we are. I think there's going to be more kindness and more happiness in the world when we all come back to who and what we really are, come back into a state of presence, a present awareness, and letting go of all those past conclusions and beliefs, which is almost like a backpack of who and what we are that we're carrying around. It's to be able to take it off and just come back, and to find, whether it's finding a technique, a meditation technique, or something that just reconnects you with that. You're re-enlivening, recognizing, to recognize something, recognize. Cognize means to know directly, to actually come back
Mm,
into the direct experience of self. I think the whole world will, because we create the world the way it is. The conflict we see, the war we see in the outside world, it's within us. That conflict's within us. And when we address the conflict within us, we recognize that we're not that which is aware of that. And the inner state changes. And I think the outer world will follow. It's mirrored, so it will follow. And everything then will be much more cohesive, unified, friendly, and it'll be a no-brainer that we'll prioritize happiness. And innovation, I think, will go up through the roof. Intellectual understanding, academic abilities will go through the roof. Any child in school, if you allow them to feel safe and happy first, they will excel. We're seeing that in Finnish schools. The Finnish school system is very much about encouraging and nurturing the creativity and the happiness in the child. They're academically much better than other languages. I remember seeing a video where an American guy was interviewing some Finnish students. He was talking about learning languages, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have to learn languages." And he's like, "What? That's terrible. Everybody should be learning languages." And then somebody piped up with, "I speak 4 languages. I think more than 3 languages around the table, 4, 5, 6
mm.
languages." And none of them had to, because they hadn't had to, just naturally they wanted to. We miss that with people. Like, people want to do that. They're creative. They're not forced or made. They're actually going to really want to explore the world, really want to excel. And there'll be nothing in the way then, because they're not trying to contain themselves and do the right thing. So they can actually be free to express all of their talents and skills and qualities. And they'll be happy while they do it. So we haven't got to then buy things to make ourselves feel happy or hang out with certain people to feel happy, because it'll just be innately within us.
Has there been a specific experience where meditation or a practice, a mindfulness practice, led to a significant shift in your perception or behavior?
For me, meditation opens up a really pure experience, a real clear consciousness that's infinite. And yeah, frequently. And in fact, I think the more consistent a practice you have, the more you open up into these experiences where there's no sense of a body. I felt that very early days. And it was lovely because it was such a light experience. A lot of physical pain when I came to Ascension, the Ascension techniques I use right now, huge amount of physical pain. So to actually have a direct experience for, even if it was only for 20 minutes, of no body, just a light, airy, expansive feeling, that for me was hugely transcendent because it was massive for the experience I was having now. And then as I've continued on, so that experience has just grown and grown. And so, yeah, it's absolutely blissful and surreal sometimes, and so gentle. Like when there's no edges in the experience whatsoever, it's so full and complete and vast and utterly mind-blowing. There's no space left for any thoughts to exist because it's such a full, alive, complete experience. So yeah, I think meditation is the best way to have these experiences, and they're so natural as well. We're just used to a different normal reality. In my book Surrender is Good for the Soul, I talk about the difference between natural and normal. Normal has always been trying to put a square peg in a round hole, and it's never worked. There's so many dysfunctional things in the world that is normal practice that have always been bewildering for me, because it's just like, but you're hurting people, that's hurting people, that doesn't make sense, it's not actually productive, it's limiting. I've always had the ability to see the potential for more, and so natural is easy. I think everybody excels because it's easy, there's no effort in that. Presence uses up no energy whatsoever. So it's almost like you power yourself as you go, like the ultimate Bluetooth device in a way. You're powered as you go throughout the world when you're present, and you don't use up energy. Thinking uses up a lot of energy. So when you come away from that and you're just fully alert and aware right now, then there's no effort involved, and everything, it flows through. It's like doing happens through you rather than there being a doer. The horrible sense of a doer and getting it right or wrong, it can be very limiting. So it's lovely to be able to come past that and come into that sense of freedom of just being yourself.
You mentioned the word ascension, and I was wondering if Ishayas have ascension tools and what the core tools are used in the Ishaya practice, because it seems to me they're designed to shift consciousness and promote a state of present moment awareness. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. That's what the Shires teach. It's the practice of ascension, and ascension is the teaching of the one. And we also call our techniques that. So we call them ascension attitudes. They're quite descriptive, really. Ascension means to rise above or beyond, like you ascend when we close our eyes, rather than calling it to meditate. We call it, I'm going to ascend. And we ascend the stairs, don't we? It's just about going up. And in this case, it's going above or beyond the limitation of the mind, above or beyond the thinking mind, so that you can have, if you walk up a tall building, you have an amazing view of a city. Whereas when you're down on the ground, you have a limited view. You only have like as much as you can see in between the buildings. Whereas ascension allows you to go above or beyond that mechanism of the mind. So your view is unhindered. There's nothing in the way. So you can have a really full, clear, pure experience. That's what ascension is. It's the name for our practice. We also have the label of the ascendant. It's a universal experience. It's called Turiya, Samadhi. Different traditions have different names for it. So the ascendant in our tradition, because it's the practice of ascension. For us, that's what it's all about, is to be able to go beyond the function of the mind. So it's like one operating mode when you're thinking, and it's not necessarily one or the other, it's one small experience where like you're wearing blinkers and that's all you can see, as opposed to ascending, going beyond that. It's like the peripheral awareness now you have. So you just see so much more. That's where a lot of the gold is in our experience. Like there are missed opportunities because we're so limited by what the mind is, that it narrows down our vision, it narrows down our attention and our awareness. So we can only see and experience what our mind says is true of the world. You can miss beauty in that, because if the mind says the world's a really dark place right now, it's really chaotic, there's so much cruelty and unkindness, and there's no opportunities, and people are starving, and that pulls the mood down, doesn't it? And then that's all in the world, and then you miss all the beauty. And for me, it's like the difference between an anti-war march and a pro-peace celebration. We need to head towards what we want more of, rather than campaign and look at the world and see all the bad and the harm and the wrongdoing in it, because what you put your attention on grows. So we need to actually start going, well, what do we want it to look like? What is good in our world right now? If you start looking for all the good stuff in the world, you'll start finding it. You'll start having a very different perception of the world if you're looking for it. Because if you're looking for something, you seek, you shall find. It's a much more proactive approach, because I think people get a bit apathetic, don't they? What's the point? The world's all in rack and ruin. There's absolutely no point. There are those of us that are going, there's every point. Do you want it to stay like this? No. So let's do something. But what is the most productive thing to do is to look at what we want more of and put all of our focus and attention on that, so that we can recreate the world anew with a vision of how we want it to look, so we can come away from how it is now and have a greater experience, a pure experience, a more vibrant, beautiful, gentle, kind experience.
There's a lot of resignation and complacency around, and there's a flip side, as you've explained so beautifully. And describing the core practice in terms of ascension, can you talk about the core of the practice? Because I understand there are attitudes within the core practice.
Yeah, so the attitudes are techniques. So you can interchange those two words. An ascension attitude is a meditation technique that we use, and the ascension attitudes are mechanical tools. So unlike, say, for example, watching the breath, you're still keeping your attention on something, on the content of life. Whereas the ascension attitudes bring you straight out and into the full experience of stillness and silence mechanically. Whether you believe they're going to work or not, it actually doesn't matter. They're structured in such a way that they work with the hemispheres of the brain, the linear qualities and the spatial qualities, and team those up together so you get complete coherence and harmony in the brain. That's directed towards, in the first 4 techniques, towards root stresses. And the techniques are based on praise, gratitude, love, and compassion. They're a program of techniques. So the first technique, based on praise, is like the easy opening in, really bite-sized step in. Then it's the foundation for all the other techniques. For example, if you praise somebody, if you say, wow, you're looking really good today, I love the color of your shirt and your eyes are amazing, the other person says, thank you. So praise leads to gratitude, and then that leads to love, connection, a feeling of affinity with the other person. Like, now we've got something in common. It feels nice. It feels welcoming and open and friendly. And love leads into compassion, that connection with the rest of humanity based on love and wisdom, that heartfelt connection. And there's more techniques beyond that, but that's what you would learn at the first sphere course that we start people off on. So you can come along and learn if you've never meditated before, or you could be an advanced meditator, for example, and it's the same format for everyone because it's such a simple teaching, and the techniques, as they are mechanical, it's like pushing a button. Bing, you're here. Then thinking will happen, and then bing. And so it's just like, as you rinse and repeat, you retrain. So it's like gym for the mind. You retrain where your attention is, stays wide, stays present, stays here. So very quickly, you release a ton of stress, and you release also those programs in the mind so that you can have a direct, clear experience of presence right now. For me, they've been life-saving techniques. I have to say, I couldn't imagine living without them. I really couldn't. Like, when I wake up in the morning, I actually feel pretty good these days, but I used to feel exhausted. Like, how am I more tired than when I went to bed? But that's what I would always be like. I never slept well. So now I sleep better. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do is ascend. I use the ascension techniques. You might call it meditation. And that sets me up for the day. Now I'm more open as I start my day, and then the day flows from there. And then I'll do another one in the middle of the day, and then another one at the end of the day. If there's any stress I have taken on board, I'll throw it off, and then I'll go into a really deep and restful sleep. So I love it. And you can use them with your eyes open as well, which for me has been transformative, because then you're not wasting any moment. And so eyes closed, it's for deep rest and healing. Eyes open is so you're not taking on any more stress and bringing you right now into a state of presence, which is invaluable. Life lived like that is very different, very fresh and alive and liberating and enjoyable.
So would I be right in saying the ultimate goal of this practice is to achieve mechanical enlightenment?
So the mechanical aspect is that the techniques work like pressing a switch. Like
I'm playing with words.
You haven't got to believe in them. You haven't got to do anything else, just being here. And really, it's just about, we're coming back to our natural state of being here. It's an undoing. We're just coming home. So really, the techniques just enliven presence. It's
Right.
just, here you go. And then as you watch the space that follows, because we're missing the still silent space because of the rings and bells and whistles of life. Like, we're fixated on thinking and emotion and body sensations and other people. And so this is just, here you go. So it's enlivened. And there comes a point where you start to recognize it and you just go, consciously, now you see it, now you're aware. It's so beautiful. You're like, now I can't miss silence. It's thick with it. That's my permanent experience. It's so apparent to me now, because as I've rinsed and repeated using the techniques, it's become enlivened and enlivened. And so really rock solid now that, yeah, I just couldn't miss it. But most people, when they come to it, they need that technique to bring them to it. They do. And even though I don't necessarily need a technique to bring me to it now, because you recognize it, and once you recognize it, you can just choose for it consciously in any given moment. But closing my eyes and ascending, it's for the rest of humanity. So we're enlivening that. It's like turning the heat up under a pan of popcorn. I've popped already. I hang out with some Ishayas, they've popped already. But we're turning that heat up each time we close our eyes and use the technique. So we're allowing the rest of the world to warm up, to lighten up, and that level of consciousness raises until we all start to see and all start to come out of that apathy and misery and go, oh, we're so miserable. For me, I couldn't take any more. I was at my wit's end. I need something now. But I think in that experience, as I described in my book, when I didn't want to live anymore, I had to hit rock bottom before I was willing to do something about it. I need to do something. And for me, it was the absolute surrender in the moment I didn't want to live anymore that opened up a transcendent experience, which I've already shared with you in the previous podcast episode and is in my first book, Peace or Pain. That was a very transformative experience because it wasn't a concept. Someone didn't tell me this is what you can have. I fell into, if you like, or opened up into the direct experience out of nowhere. Then I was almost hungry for it because I'm just like, whoa, worst experience of my life, best experience of my life, right on the back of it. So yes, there's a choice, peace or pain in any given moment. Because if I could have that at the moment where I didn't want to live anymore and I was so dark and miserable and so much pain, then anything's possible. It just opened up just a crack in me. Obviously, the transcendent experience faded and then back into everyday life. But now I had the direct experience. And now I'm like, that's it. I'm going to go for this. How do I do this? And then I found the Ishaya shortly afterwards. So it's almost like I'm ready now. And the teaching appeared.
There's the root of Ishayas in ancient traditions, but the modernity of Ishaya monks don't follow, from what I can glean, strict aesthetic practices. They integrate their spiritual practice with everyday life. So there's a non-sectarian approach to it. The teachings seem, to my mind, universal, compatible with various religious or philosophical backgrounds.
Yeah, so it's not a religious organization, it's spiritual. People could come, like I think we had a Buddhist monk come and then became an Ishaya monk because there's so many similarities with it. There's no contradiction there. Yeah. Sometimes people are Christians, and it actually doesn't matter because there's no dogma, there's no religion. So again, ascension, it's going beyond the belief system to the direct, pure experience. We're all pure awareness, so anyone can have it, whether pure or impure. It doesn't matter what you've done in this life, good or bad, or anything in between. You can have this. All you've got to do is go for it. If you want it, go for it. And I love that. There's the concept of useful boundaries. One of the meanings of my name, Mira, which is why my company is called Boundless Meditation, is the boundless goddess. And yet, for me, in my life, I've had no boundaries. So people have walked all over me. So there is a usefulness of useful boundaries. There's an importance of that. You put certain things in place if people overstep the mark, for example, and you go, no, that's not okay with me, something like that. There's also practices like having the techniques, for example. I can bring people into a state of presence without using the techniques whatsoever. I teach other meditation practices and I can guide them into that experience. Ascension for me is like the Rolls Royce of meditation. It really goes right into the heart of the experience very quickly. But having useful boundaries enables people. So, for example, on my Mastery of the Self course, we weren't having sugar or alcohol or caffeine. There was a purpose for that because they're stimulants. And if you're having stimulants when you're closing your eyes and wanting to rest and connect within, it's quite challenging to do that. The stimulants create a lot more thinking. So it's a little bit more challenging to go beyond the thinking and go beyond the patterns. For 6 months, we're cutting out those things, the useful boundaries, the guidelines, temporarily, so that you can ultimately free yourself and not need those anymore. And you have that boundless experience. Is that making sense?
Absolutely. We can detox our mental and emotional diets to support our awakening process. I know for myself, if I have coffee and I want to sit quietly for a while, I'm not affected by caffeine that much. But when you go into that place of stillness and quiet, I can feel my brain's got its foot on the gas. But when I take that out of my diet, there's a whole different harmony within my inner community.
Absolutely. Just to be clear, the Ishayas love coffee and they want the very best coffee
Yeah.
as well. It's almost like the last vice, if you like, the last addiction in a way. And I remember people coming to courses before I even became an Ishaya monk. I was attending them on what the teachers would say. And sometimes people think, so you've got to be a vegetarian, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. It's this purified life. And no, actually, you don't have to do any of that. The boundless experiences maybe temporarily so that you can cultivate the experience, the direct living experience of awareness, very useful boundary, but then ultimately the freedom for us to choose coffee, no coffee, chocolate, no chocolate. So for me, it's more chocolate than coffee.
I'm very keen to come and do this. I feel called to do it. I'm at that point in my life where I'm very deep in prayer and meditation. I feel like I'm being lifted into the light without descending into cliches about it. But I had to face my own darkness because darkness absorbs the light and you have to go into the darkness to light it up. That's what I've been doing over many years. But now I feel in a very different place where I want to lift others up. I want to lift those people who feel alone, who feel weak, who feel they need some kind of understanding about their own technology, about their inner community. When you have peaceful chemistry, you have peace of mind.
Then we can do another podcast interview once you've learned, and then you'll have different questions, I should imagine.
One of the things I was thinking about was I'd love to make a documentary about it. I'd love to journal it and make a visual documentary of it because I think it's important that people get a visual of it because we can talk about it. And I don't know if this is something that you would condone, but that's what comes to mind is to document the experience of it. I've just got some ideas about it, but I want to have the visceral experience of it. Where can people find you? Where can people buy your book?
My website is boundless-meditation.co.uk. All the links for my books are on Amazon, so you can go straight to Amazon, or you can find the links on my website. Also on my website, there'll be the courses if you want to come along and learn, from beginner's meditation to courses on pain or emotional awareness. I like doing them on themes, basically, so that you can address what's up for you the most, or de-stress, or whatever it is. And there's also links to my YouTube channel where I do video shorts and longer webinars, so people can have those little bite-size, they're released weekly, the video shorts, little bite-size things. The meditation as a means to rebel, that's one of my video shorts, for example. So if you want to hear me speaking about just that, or building roots in consciousness, it's just like talking about these things in very short bursts. All of that's on my website, including course to learn the ascension techniques, which is just amazing. If you want more out of life, there's got to be more to life than this, and they're the techniques for you.
Do you have any passing words at all?
Go for what you want. Don't put up with a life that isn't what you truly want. Go for your heart's greatest desire, even if it seems impractical, impossible. For me, it used to feel like that. And going on my Mastery of the Self course, like I didn't go the first year I wanted to go because I'm like, I can't. The mind throws up all these reasons. Don't listen to the mind. That voice in your head isn't the awareness of the voice. So listen to your heart. Go for what your heart wants with all of your heart, with 100% commitment. Because if you go for something and everything's going in the same direction, it brings that driving force, that energy, and heading towards what you want more of, rather than looking back and trying to get rid of something. Like, just go for it. Honestly, just go for it. And life can totally change around. It has for me, and there's nothing special about me. I went for it, and I went for it with all of my heart. And I went through it out of desperation, actually. It was just like I couldn't tolerate the pain anymore. It was amazing to just go, what can I do about this? I did have an amazing experience that kind of gave me the taste of it. This is possible. And then I'm like, that's it. And just go for it. And if you do, you'll really surprise yourself, and you can step out comfort zones again and again quite easily. If you're excited, if you're curious and willing, you've got to be willing. You've got to be willing to do something different than you're already doing, because otherwise you're just going to keep getting the same results. So yeah, go for your heart's desire.
That's beautiful. Mira, thank you so much for sharing your insights, giving us your time,
Yeah.
and an insight into the Ishaya monks. Ruthless compassion, meditation as a means to rebel. I love that. And your book is called Surrender is Good for the Soul. Beautiful.
Thank you so much for having me on, Peter. It's been amazing. I love chatting with you. You're very insightful. I love the way you look at the world, and the phrases and the words that you use. They're wonderful.
You're most welcome.